Welcome to Preeminent Test Prep. Today I'll be taking you through the writing and language section of SAT Practice Test 9. I'll be giving you my tips and tricks for the writing section as well as answer explanations for each question. So let's go ahead and get started with question 1 in passage 1. Alright, questions 1 through 11 are based on the following passage: survival in the hostile environment of NW Rota 1. Alright, I see I have this 1 here, so I'm going to go ahead and find which sentence I have to place, read that, so I can place it as I read. So I'm asked to make the paragraph most logical. Sentence 5 should be placed where? I'm going to find sentence 5. I see that it says, at that depth, water pressure suppresses the explosive force of the volcano's eruptions, allowing scientists to, and then I'll go ahead and answer this as I read it. So I have watch and observe. I know that those two are synonyms of each other, so I don't need both of them because then I'm being repetitive and redundant, which I don't want to do. So I can get rid of my no change option, and I see my answer is going to be B because C, observe to see, that's redundant, and visually watch is also redundant. So my answer there will be B. All right, so I'm placing sentence 5. We see that it reads the rest, them up close via remotely operated vehicles. But the big thing that stands out to me in sentence 5 is I have at that depth. So it should follow a sentence talking about depth. So when I see a sentence talking about depth, I know that sentence 5 should come after it. All right, so 60 miles north of Guam and more than 1,700 feet under the ocean's surface is the summit of NW Rota 1, an undersea volcano discovered in 2003. All right, well, I read 1,700 feet under the ocean's surface. That's a depth. Now I see I have at that depth in sentence 5, which means sentence 5 should come after sentence 1. So my answer is going to be B for question 2. All right, so we've got, surprisingly, the volcano appears to have been continuously active. It grew 130 feet in height between 2006 and 2009, yet despite the hostile environment created by the constant volcanic activity, life is thriving there. Special adaptations are key to the survival. All right, NW Rota 1 is far below the ocean's photic zone where sunlight drives photosynthesis. Nevertheless, I see that I have a transition word here, so I'm looking to see if I should keep that transition word or if I should change it. I look at my answer choices, and I have to know what the rest of my sentence is saying to know which transition to use. So I see I have bacteria supporting a unique food web have adapted to this perpetually dark environment. Well, considering that this is right here, this bacteria supporting a unique food web have adapted to this perpetually dark environment, right? That's in spite of the fact that it's below the ocean's photic zone, which is the zone that receives sunlight to drive photosynthesis, right? So that nevertheless is going to be my answer, right? Because even though it struggles to gain sunlight, so it can't use photosynthesis, it still has a unique food web in this environment. So my answer there is going to be A. All right, the bacteria have evolved to use hydrogen sulfide instead of sunlight for the energy that drives their metabolic processes. And hydrothermal venting is the source of the chemical soup necessary to support, that's going to be them. All right, so our answer there is going to be C. How do we know it's them? Well, we know that if we look back, it says the energy that drives their metabolic processes, right? We're talking about the bacteria, all right? So that's plural. Their metabolic processes is plural, so I have to use the plural pronoun them. So that's going to be C. Seawater seeping into fissures in the ocean floor is heated by underlying magma, and the heat drives chemical reactions that remove oxygen, sulfates, and other chemicals. We don't have to say remove again because we say remove, let's see, and the heat drives chemical reactions that remove right here, right? So we don't have to say remove one more time. We can just say and, so our answer there will be D. All right, once the superheated water up to 750 degrees Fahrenheit rises through vents in the ocean floor, additional reactions cause minerals and compounds to precipitate onto the seafloor where bacteria feed on them. All right, Lothi shrimp, originally thought to exist only around an undersea volcano near Hawaii, survived by using tiny shear-like claws to harvest rapidly growing bacterial filaments covering the rocks near NW Rota 1's hydrothermal vents. All right, well, as I read this, what I saw immediately that jumped out to me is I saw I had this M dash here, which means that I'm probably using a non-essential phrase. And since it was only preceded by Lothi shrimp, I know it's going to be a non-essential phrase that follows it. So when I have this non-essential phrase and I set it off in the beginning by an M dash, I have to set it off at the end by an M dash. So my answer has to be C because it's the only one with that M dash. All right, the Lohi shrimp spend most of their time grazing on the bacteria and evading another, previously unknown species of shrimp. Shrimp of that species also graze on bacterial filaments as juveniles. Okay, now I'm told which choice most effectively sets up the information in the next sentence. So I'm going to go ahead and look through my answer choices. We have A, resulting from their ability to cope with the noxious environment around the volcano. And then I have they feed on the Lohi shrimp and other organisms that are overcome by the toxic plumes of volcanic gas, and ash. All right, well, if they're feeding on Lohi shrimp, right, but it says they feed on bacterial filaments as juveniles. So now they're no longer doing that. So I'm going to look for something that's indicating a contrast in the beginning. So I have but in B, and I have but in D. So those are my two contrast words, right? So that's what I'm going to look at first. So I can't get rid of C yet, but I can go ahead and look at B and D first. I see B, we have but their adaptations are not fully understood by the scientific community. But my sentence that follows that right here, right, that doesn't talk about adaptations not being fully understood. So I'm not going to use that. I look at D, we have but as adults, that's contrasting them as juveniles. Their claws are large enough for the shrimp to be predators. Yes, that's going to be my answer, right? We talk about them being predators that feed on low-heat shrimp and other organisms. So my answer there is going to be D for number 7. All right, during an underwater eruption, steam quickly condenses. And then I have the steam leaves. Well, I just said steam quickly condenses. I don't need to say the steam again. I'm told to combine the sentences. I can get rid of the steam and I can just say condenses and leaves. That's efficient. There's no repetitiveness or redundancy, so I can get rid of B, C, and D, right? B, C, and D, they're all redundant. Having to leave, they're after leaving, and then after this it leaves. Those aren't efficient in word choice, but A is efficient in word choice, so I'm going to pick A. All right. This means that the water near NW Rota 1 is more acidic than that of stomach acid. We don't have to say that of stomach acid. We can just say than stomach acid, right? It's more acidic than, and we can just go ahead and get right into our noun, stomach acid. We don't have to say the acid from stomach. Another thing, that would say the acid from stomach acid. We would never say that. That's repetitive. Those of stomach acid, it's not going to be those, right? Because it's not plural like that. And then we've got D. Okay, yep, I'm sorry. Okay, yep, my answer there is going to be D, right? I didn't realize that acid was not underlined. My answer will be D. That's not going to be answer choice A, because answer choice A would read more acidic than that of stomach acid. So we can go ahead and get rid of A. Our answer there will be D, which leaves it as more acidic than stomach acid. Presenting yet another challenge to life forms living nearby. As the carbon dioxide level in Earth's atmosphere rises, the world's oceans absorb more carbon dioxide. All right, what I see right off the bat, this apostrophe after worlds indicates that there's multiple worlds, but we're only talking about one. So we have to have that apostrophe come between that D and the S, which means I'm left with answer choices B and C. Next, I see have this apostrophe after oceans, but the oceans doesn't own anything, so it can't be possessive. So I have to get rid of B as a choice, and my answer choice will be C, the world's oceans, right? The oceans are possessed by the world, and that world is singular. So my answer there is going to be C. Question 11 asks me to consider revising the underlined portion to the following. Dioxide, which increases their acidity. We're asked, should the writer make this revision? All right, well, if we read the sentence, we have, as the carbon dioxide level in the Earth's atmosphere rises, the world's oceans absorb more carbon dioxide. Well, why is that important here? Because it kind of seems out of place if we don't have anything else. Well, we're considering revising it to carbon dioxide, which increases their acidity. This whole paragraph is talking about the acidity underneath these ocean depths, right? So we have the water near NW Rota 1 is more acidic, right? Then stomach acid presents another challenge to life forms living nearby, right? We're all talking about acidity here. So what we need to include here is that as that CO2 rises, so does the acidity. So our answer is going to be yes, because it explains the relevance of the sentence to the point made in the paragraph. So my answer there is going to be A. All right, now we can move on to passage 2, which questions 12 to 22 are based on. Free public transportation. City planners concerned about vehicle traffic clogging cities' roadways are trying to find ways to get people out of their cars and onto buses and trains. One radical proposal some planners have considered is to make public transportation free to passengers. While fare-free policies do increase ridership, but, well, here's what I see is wrong with this right here. Fare-free policies do increase ridership. That is a dependent clause because I have the subordinate conjunction well, right? So that's my dependent clause. If I have a dependent clause followed by our independent clause, which I'm going to mark as ID for independent, which is they have not been found to be an effective way to address traffic problems, I need to have a comma after ridership, right, after my dependent clause, but I don't need that fanboy, right, that for, and, nor, but, or, yet, or so, right? I don't need any of those after it. So I should answer C, and I can get rid of D, A, and B. All right, now we got question 13, so we're going to move down to there. We have, moreover, these policies may result in serious budget shortfalls. Now I'm asked for 13, which choice is the most effective version of the underlined portion? So I'll go ahead and read that. We have, not surprisingly, public transportation is used by more people when people do not have to pay a fare. Here's what's wrong with that. We repeat people twice, right? We don't want to do that because that's repetitive, so we can get rid of A. We have B, more people use public transportation if they do not have to pay a fare. Yep, that's very efficient. It's not repetitive and it's not redundant, so our answer there will be B. If we look at C, we have if people do not have to pay a fare, more of those people use public transportation. Once again, we're saying people twice. That's repetitive. We don't want to do that. We can get rid of that. We see D, using public transportation is done. Well, if we're saying using public transportation and is done, that's also repetitive and inefficient, right? So we don't want to do that either. So our answer there is going to be B. All right, question 14. We're going to go ahead and read our way down there. So we have, according to a report by the Center for Urban Transportation Research, public transit systems that abolish fares typically see a short-term increase in ridership of about 50%. However, this increase does not necessarily correlate with a decrease in car traffic. Evidence suggests that when buses and subways are free, people often take bus and train trips they would not have taken otherwise while still using their cars nearly as much as they did before. In 2013, Tallinn, Estonia instituted fare-free rides for city residents, becoming the largest city in the world to do so. But car use in Tallinn has only slightly declined, as a 2014 study by the KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden found that car traffic in Tallinn was down less than 3% since, right here it says it, I know we have to use the policy, right? We want to be specific there. Since what? Since the policy was enacted. So answer 15 is going to be D. We look at 14. Here's the problem with 14 right now. What follows this semicolon is a dependent clause, right? As a 2014 study by the KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden found. That is my dependent clause, right? I don't want to go independent clause, which I do before it, right? In 2013, Tallinn, Estonia instituted fare-free rides for city residents. That's my independent clause, right? I don't want to do that and then go into a dependent clause, right? I can do that, but I don't want to use a semicolon to connect those. So I can go ahead and get rid of A, right? Now I look at B. Here's what I see immediately. I know that what comes after this, whatever punctuation I choose to put here, right? It's illustrating that idea that preceded it, right? It's illustrating how in 2013, Tallinn, Estonia instituted fare-free rides for city residents, but car use only slightly declined, right? And now I'm continuing to illustrate my claim, right? When I say, as a study by the KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden found car traffic in Tallinn was down less than 3% since the policy was enacted. So I'm illustrating that idea that preceded what comes after whatever punctuation I decide to put right here. So when I illustrate that idea, what I want to connect it with is a colon. So my answer is going to be B, right? And that colon works because it's connecting that independent clause that's preceding it to this independent clause down here. I'll show you it's right here. We have Tallinn was down less than 3% since the car traffic in Tallinn was down less than 3%, right? That's my independent clause. So I've got two independent clauses, and the second one is illustrating the first, so I'm going to use that colon to connect them. B, we would create a comma splice, and then D, it's kind of clunky, right? And we'd be starting out then with a dependent clause. A better choice is B, right? The better choice is going to be answer choice B because we're illustrating that idea that was preceding that second sentence. All right, now we can go ahead and move on. Instituting a fare-free system can also have a devastating effect on a city's transportation budget. We're asked which choice best introduces the paragraph. We need to read on to know what the paragraph's about. All public transportation systems are subsidized by the government to some extent, but large systems gain a substantial portion of their operating revenue from fares. Since systems that go fare-free see increases in ridership, they often must operate more buses and trains and hire more drivers and other personnel at the same time. They are losing a key source of funding. Okay, what I see on that is those are all examples of how instituting fare-free systems have devastating effects on cities' transportation budgets. So my answer there will be A, right? That's going to be my best choice. All right, now we can go ahead and move on. We have advocates of fare-free policies claim that the costs of these policies are largely offset by various savings. However, a recent study comparing projected results of fare-free policies in different cities found this outlook to be way too sunny. Okay, way too sunny, right? That doesn't fit with the tone of the passage, right? The tone is fairly academic. So we don't want to say way too sunny or looking too much on the bright side or pretty upbeat. We want to use something that's academic, and that's going to be overly optimistic. So our answer for 18 will be D. Looking at 17, I know that I cannot use this comma here with however because I have an independent clause preceding it, right? I have advocates of fare-free systems claim the costs of these policies are largely offset by various savings, right? That's my independent clause. And then after, however, I have a recent study comparing projected results of fare-free policies in different cities found this outlook to be overly optimistic. That is another independent clause, right? So when I do that, I know that my answer can't be A because that's a comma splice. My answer can't be B because that's also a comma splice. My answer then is going to be C, right? And I can't have D either because I use a semicolon and then start with and we don't want to do that. So my answer here is going to be C, right? And I'm using but to contrast those, right? That the advocates claim this, but a recent study suggests otherwise. So I want to use that contrast but, and that also connects my two independent clauses with a comma and a fanboy. So my answer for 17 will be C. Now we can go and move on. We have, for example, in San Francisco, California, fare-free public transit was projected to save $8.4 million per year in fare collection costs, but now we're asked what choice provides an accurate interpretation of the chart. All right, we're talking about San Francisco, so we're going to go ahead and circle the row that we're looking at. All right, so we're looking for what's accurate according to the chart, but created a deficit of $72 million per year in lost fares. All right, well, we see lost fares was 112, right? And we don't really have a deficit in any of our column headlines, right? So we know A is incorrect. We look at B, save an additional $112 million from lost fares. Well, if we're losing fares, we can't save money, so we can get rid of B. C, but result in a total increase of 184 million per year in operating costs. We see additional operating costs is 184 million, so our answer there will be C. All right, now we can go and move on. Question 20. The writer is considering adding the following sentence based on information from the chart. By contrast, Lane Transit in Eugene, Oregon would lose only $5 million in fares if it instituted a fare-free system. We're going to go ahead and check and make sure that's accurate. We see it is. We have cost in lost fares is $5 million in Lane Transit, Oregon. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and read. We have question 20. We're just adding it right here, right? So we look at our choices. So should the writer add this? Well, let's look at our options here. So we have 2 yeses, 2 nos, right? We've got yes because it proves how little money Eugene would lose under a fare-free system compared with San Francisco. Well, that doesn't support our argument, right? Our argument is that these free fare policies, right, they cost so much and are detrimental to the government's budgets, right? So what we're going to want to do here is we are not going to want to add it, right? Because it says lose only $5 million in fares, right? That's pretty small compared to the other figures that we've been looking at, right? So we don't want to say would lose only $5 million in fares. We want it to seem like they're losing a lot more because this is an argumentative type of piece, right? So we aren't going to want to add this, and we're not going to want to add it because it doesn't support the argument that fare-free systems cause a substantial loss for governments. So our answer is going to be C. All right, 21. This is not to say that fare-free public education is always a bad idea. Some college towns and resorts and communities embrace the model because buses can go faster when drivers would not have had. Well, no, do not have, right? The buses can go faster, right, when the drivers do not have to collect fares, right? Not did not have and not will not have. Will not have would be future. We see did not have would be past, and would not have also does not fit, right? We want do not have, right? They move faster when drivers do not have to collect fares. All right. Now we've got for large cities looking to reduce automobile traffic, though, which choice best provides a conclusion? Research about Tallinn, Estonia could be instructive. No, right? We want something that sums up the whole passage, not just that one piece of evidence that Tallinn, Estonia provided. We have B, subways will be more important than buses. No, we don't make that argument. C, public and transit should be cheaper but not free. We don't make the argument it should be cheaper. D, fare-free public education is not the answer. We do make that argument. So our answer for 22 will be D. Now we move on to passage 3. Questions 23 to 33 are based on the following passage. Wet plate photography, an old technique, makes a new splash. All right, so I see I have a 1 here, so I'm going to find what sentence I have to place. So I see that question is 24. The writer plans to add the following sentence to this paragraph. Why wouldn't they? To make the paragraph most logical, the sentence should be placed where? All right, well, I'm looking for where I can place this question, right? So I want to have something before it where there's a change, right? And then why wouldn't they make this change? So I read through, I have upon the arrival of the digital camera, professional photographers harumphed that they produced ugly, low-resolution images. Well, we're not going to use they, right? We're looking at what word we need to use here. We're going to use it because we're talking about the digital camera that produces these ugly, low-resolution images, right? Our digital camera is singular, so we can't use they, right? We can go ahead and get rid of a. It can't be he or she because it's not a male or a female, right? It's not a human. And we're not going to use one either, right? Because we're not talking about like one could do this, right? It's it, right? It's an object, it's singular, so we're going to use it there. Yet eventually the vast majority of them traded film for megapixels, right? What did I talk about when I saw this sentence here that I had to place? I wanted to see a change before it, right? Because why wouldn't they make that change? Well, they're making that change to film or from film to megapixels, right? So following that, I want to have that why wouldn't they? So my answer is going to be B after sentence 2, and we see that works out well because sentence 3 says, the latest digital cameras take pictures so crisp that the images in them appear to be die cut, right? So we want to go from talking about this change, why wouldn't we make this change, right, when it's so, and then we provide support for why we would obviously make this change, right, in sentence 3. All right, for even today's humblest smartphones snap bright, sharp photos. A few contemporary photographers, however, have embraced an anachronistic method that was state-of-the-art technology when it was invented in 1851, wet plate photography. All right, 25. At this point, so we'll go ahead and work our way down. We have wet plate photographers essentially create their own film. The process can be dangerous given it requires the use of several volatile chemicals. We're asked, should the writer make this addition? It's also labor intensive, involving several intricate steps. Well, we need to read on to know what follows this in order to know if we should add it. So we see that we have to take a wet plate photograph. Photographers usually first arrange or pose. Okay, I know that this is not the correct word to use here because whose subjects is it? It's the photographer's subjects. Photographers is plural, and we have it's their subjects. So we need a plural possessive pronoun. Our plural possessive pronoun is their, spelled T-H-E-I-R. So our answer for 26 will be D. We read that we have before mixing collodion, a viscous, light-sensitive chemical solution with bromide, iodide, or chloride, and applying the mixture to a clean, polished glass plate. Dried collodion is unusable. All right, now I see I'm asked for my transition word. Since I see that this says that it's unusable, I'm probably looking at explaining what that's causing, right? So we have it's unusable, so, or therefore, once the photo is snapped with a massive tripod-mounted camera the photographer has, and then I'll go ahead and answer that. But we have, the reason I know that we're going to have no change right here is because we say that this dried collodion is unusable, and then we talk about what implications that has. So, since that dried collodion is unusable, we're going to use so. Once the photo is snapped, we only have a mere amount of minutes. So my answer for 27 will be A, no change. Now I can go back up here. What have we been talking about throughout this? We've been talking about the several intricate steps needed, right, to make these wet plate photos. So we're going to want to add this sentence because it's setting up that outline of the process of wet plate photography. So our answer there is going to be B. All right, now we can go ahead and move on. Make sure we've answered all of them so far, and we have. So we can go ahead and move on. We've got question 28. All right, so once the photo is snapped with a massive tripod-mounted camera, the photographer has, now we're solving for this word choice right here. So how many minutes to develop it using more chemicals? The writer wants to emphasize how quickly wet plate photographers have to work. Which choice effectively accomplishes this goal? Well, that's going to be the one that makes this sound as fast as possible, right? Nominal is not a good word choice here, right? Nominal is not telling us really that it's such a short amount of time, right? But if we look at mere minutes, right? When we think of mere minutes, we think, okay, we don't have many minutes, right? We're short on time. We have to move quickly. If we think of a few, well, a few can mean a fair amount, right? So we don't want to use B. A matter of, right? That's still not, that's not very efficient, right? A matter of instead of versus mere. Mere is much more efficient word choice, but also mere is really more of a common expression for having to do something very quickly, right? You have mere minutes to do it, whereas a matter of minutes could mean more than mere, right? So our answer there is going to be D. All right, when the image appears in the negative, water is used to stop the process. A chemical fixed bath turns the negative image into a positive one. The photo is then immersed in water and warmed. All right off the bat, I know since I have this followed by a comma, right? Two words or one word followed by a comma in the beginning of a sentence, I'm looking for a transition word, right? So pretty much throughout all of this, right, we've been talking about the steps that we go through to make this. Well, now we're talking about our final step. So we're going to want to use finally. We're not going to use nevertheless. We're not going to use the or in conclusion. We've been using steps. Now we're talking about the final step, so we want to use B, finally. It is coated with lavender oil to give it, all right, a protective finish. We don't need anything around a protective finish. We do want it to just read oil to give it a protective finish, right? We don't want to have anything around it because it doesn't need it. We don't need an em dash. We don't need commas. Right, we just want to go straight through. Our answer is going to be D. All right, wet plane photos are marvelously fine-grained and detailed, and they seem to glow with an ethereal silvery light. One misstep or a speck of dust on the glass plate, though, and flaws appear. Smudges resembling oyster shells swirl around the photo's edges. All right, here's how I know my answer is going to be A, no change. I look at all of these. I see none of them match with what my verbs have been previously, right? I have appear. That's present tense. So I want that present tense swirl as well, right? And none of these have that, right? We have swirled. That's not present tense swirled. That's past tense. Will have swirled. That doesn't even really make sense. So we know our answer is going to be A because it's consistent with the previous verbs, such as appear, glow, right? We want to match that verb tense. All right. Sunbursts or streaks emerge when collodions pools unevenly. Since the film requires long exposures, moving subjects blur. Okay, now we got to figure out what we want this sentence to say. So we've got 32. A shifting arm or leg might even disappear because of the length of exposure time required. I can get rid of that, and here's why. We just said since the film requires long exposures, moving subjects blur. So if I use A, I'm repeating that, and I don't want to repeat things, right? I want to avoid being repetitive and redundant, and I want to be efficient instead. I want to be efficient, right? So I look at B, an arm or leg shifting during the long exposure time. Once again, I'm repeating long exposure time, so I can get rid of B. C, a wet plate photographer's subject's arm or leg might even disappear during the long exposure time. Once again, that's repetitive. I see D will be my answer. A shifting arm or leg might even disappear, and that is efficient, so my answer will be D. All right, the exposure time required explains why people in wet plate photographs often look dour. It's hard to hold a smile for that long. Prominent among contemporary wet plate photographers is Joni Sternbach, whose work centers appropriately on water and people's relationships to it. Sternbach's photo series Ocean Details, Sea, Sky, and Surf Land depict surging surface, roiling waves, and the surfers who ride them. All right, now I'm told the writer wants to highlight the contrast between Sternbach's techniques, which are old, and the people she photographs, which are obviously in the present. Which choice most effectively accomplishes this goal? All right, well, if we look at A, her subjects could be 19th century wave riders, right? 19th century, that's about when this technology, the wet plate photography, emerged. It said it was 1851, if I remember correctly. If not for the modern, so we're contrasting the time, right? Modern board shorts and bikinis they wear. So we know A is going to work out well, and A will be our answer because we're contrasting her techniques, which are old, to the people that she's photographing, which are modern, right? So our answer there will be A. All right, we know it's not going to be B. The subjects could be ordinary people, right? If not for the modern board shorts and bikinis they wear, because even if they're wearing that, they could still be ordinary people. There's no contrast there. C, it would be hard to tell her subjects are surfers. No, it still would be easy to tell because they're still wearing clothing that surfers would wear. And C, they would come from all walks of life. If not for what they were wearing, once again, that's not going to be our answer. All right, passage 4. Questions 34 to 44 are based on the following passage. Digging up cities. In 2010, as a construction crew began to tear up sidewalks in New York City's South Street Seaport to replace a water pipe, Alyssa Laurier and her team watched eagerly, picks and brushes in hand. Laurier, an urban archaeologist, studies the history of cities. I see we're asked if we should revise the underlined portion of the following. Cities by excavating artifacts that have accumulated over centuries of land development. Well, in order to know if we should add it here, we should really read that next sentence to get an idea of more of the context. We see the next sentence states, any new New York City construction project using municipal funds, and we can go ahead and answer 35. 35 is going to be is, and here's how I know that. Because I have any New York City construction project, right? Any New York City construction project, that's my subject. My subject and verb have to match in number, right? Any New York City construction project, that's singular, which means my verb also has to be singular, and present tense to match with studies, right? So present tense and singular is going to be is there. So I'll go ahead and answer that. See if we can get it to scroll. So we got answer C for 35. All right, is required to consider whether historical artifacts will be affected during construction, and if that possibility exists or is possible, we want to get rid of one of those, right? We want to just have exists. We don't need exists. It is necessary that exists potentially. We want to be efficient, so we're just going to use exists, right? An urban archaeologist must be consulted. That's going to be our answer there. All right, so we can go and back up to 34. All right, so should the writer make this revision? The answer is going to be yes, and here's why, right? We have cities by excavating artifacts that have accumulated over centuries of land development. Well, what that's doing is that's setting up the rest of the passage by explaining what these urban archaeologists do. Because as we see from what we just read, we're clearly going to talk in the passage about urban archaeologists, and we're not really talking about the characteristics making particular cities worth of archaeological study, right? And we can always come back to this if the passage changes, but just from the introduction, it's looking like we're going to be talking about what urban archaeologists do. So our answer is going to be A. All right, now we can go ahead and move on. We've got, since the South Street Seaport area was a bustling commercial center for early colonists, Laurier anticipated that a rich history lay beneath the pavement. It's our job to document and recover that history before it's lost, she said. As the work continued, okay, we're not going to use therefore. Therefore would indicate a causal relationship, right? One thing happened which caused or resulted in another. We just have as the work continued, so we can't use a causal relationship. We have B, though, as the work continued, though, the team faced obstacles. That's good because it's showing that as they continued to work, right, even though things were supposed to go well, they faced obstacles. So that's a good transition. If I look at C, Meanwhile and what? We never really stated, right? We said as the work continued. If we just said as the work continued, we don't need to repeat by saying meanwhile, right? Because we didn't say something was happening over here, meanwhile it's happening over here. We're just continuing to talk about that same work. And similarly, we're not comparing to anything, so we can get rid of that. Field work in a city has to be done intermittently. The construction crew has to proceed one block at a time to avoid interrupting traffic. And the archaeology's team's work was periodically halted, by stormy weather and the discovery of toxic materials underground. That is going to be a prepositional phrase. I don't want anything between that verb and the verb halted in my prepositional phrase. So my answer there is just going to be D. I want it all together. I'm not splitting it with any punctuation. Moreover, as archaeologists underground attempted to relay information to those at the surface, they had to contend with the noise of construction vehicles, car horns, and pedestrians. And here's why it should be C, just pedestrians, because we say the noise of construction vehicles, car horns, and pedestrians. This noise of, it's applying to the construction vehicles and the car horns and the pedestrians, so we don't have to repeat noise, right? So we can get rid of A, B, and then that of pedestrians, that would get rid of our parallelism between these three in that list. So our answer is going to be C there. All right, now we got question 40. Despite these setbacks, Laurier and her team eventually began to uncover some interesting artifacts. In 2012, the team discovered a foundation wall, a network of wooden pipes, and several well bases dating into the 18th century. In August 2013, the archaeologists discovered thousands of objects in a single 15-foot stretch that was likely a garbage disposal site. All right, I start this sentence with including. Generally, I don't want to do that. I'm going to see if it's an independent clause or not. Including buttons from Revolutionary War uniforms, clay pipes, and an imported mineral water bottle from Germany. All right, this is not an independent clause. Since it's not an independent clause, we can't have it be a sentence on its own, so we can go ahead and get rid of A. We have B. We're using a comma then, but we're also adding among these were. When we add among these were, we create an independent clause now after that comma, which would mean we'd have a comma splice with two independent clauses. We can't have that. C, we have cite including. Okay, this is going to create that participle phrase, right, which we can separate with a comma. So that is acceptable. C would be our answer there. We can't use that semicolon unless we have an independent clause over here. When we have including there, we don't have that independent clause, as I discussed earlier, so we can get rid of D. All right. As they cleaned and cataloged the artifacts, archaeologists took stock of their findings. The team's discoveries provided a snapshot of, now we're asked, which choice most effectively sets up the example discussed in the following sentence. All right, well, what's our example discussed in the following sentence? It says, colonial area New Yorkers went to great lengths to secure fresh drinking water, Laurier noted, given the effort, and we'll go ahead and answer this, involved in laying wooden pipes to bring in fresh water from surrounding areas, digging very deep wells, brewing alcohol to mask the water's salty taste, and even importing bottled water. Okay, we're told what best maintains the style and tone. Okay, this one worked well, right? It didn't jump out to me at all. It seemed normal and well placed, so I'm going to answer A. We're not going to use blood, sweat, and tears, right? Because that doesn't fit with our tone. Neither does hassle or feats of strength and fortitude. All right, back to 41 now. Which choice best set up that example? That example was all talking about public utility planning and infrastructure development, so our answer there is going to be C. All right, now we got question 43 and 44. Through such discoveries, we need to know who they is, so we have to choose urban archaeologist, D, because it never states in that sentence who they is, so we can't just say they, we have to say D, urban archaeologists. They're the ones who are telling the story of a city's history in a new way. All right, 44. The writer wants to conclude the passage with a quotation from Laurier that illustrates the broad impact of her team's work. Which choice most effectively accomplishes this goal? Well, if I look at answer choice A, we have one of my favorite things is putting together someone's life. Problem with that is we're putting together a city's life, not someone, right? So we can get rid of A. If we look at B, New York City construction has lots of stops and starts. That is not the theme and the point about urban archaeologists, right? The point of her team work is not that construction has lots of stops and starts. C, finding the bits and pieces that were actually used by the people in the past, which is what urban archaeologists are doing, makes New York City's history real. Yes, that's discussing the broad impact of our team's work in New York City, right? So that's going to be our answer. We look at D, we can get rid of it because it says we call our archaeological technique monitoring. We aren't really concerned with what they're calling their techniques, right? That's not the broad impact of urban archaeologists. Thank you for watching Preeminent Test Prep. Make sure to subscribe, like, and share as we will be releasing more videos to help you prepare for the SAT.